The dinner rush at Bellissimo restaurant was finally dying down. Elena Martinez grabbed a wet cloth and started wiping down the corner table, her feet aching in her cheap work shoes. It was almost 10 at night and she'd been on her feet since 5. Tomorrow morning, she'd wake up at 7 to help kids with their music lessons across town. That's just how life was now. 2 jobs, barely enough sleep, and dreams that felt further away with each passing day. She was 28 years old, and somewhere along the way, everything had gone sideways. 5 years ago, she was studying piano at one of the best music schools in New York City. She could feel Chopin flowing through her fingers, could lose herself in Beethoven for hours. Her professors said she had something special. But then her mom got sick. The medical bills piled up and the scholarship money just wasn't enough anymore. She had to choose between her dreams and her family. It wasn't really a choice at all. Now here she was, carrying plates of expensive pasta to people who probably spent more on one dinner than she made in a week. Her fingers, the same ones that used to dance across piano keys in concert halls, now smelled like garlic and dish soap. Sometimes late at night, she'd sit on her tiny apartment floor and cry about it. But most days, she was just too tired to feel anything. Tonight felt different, though. The whole restaurant staff had been on edge all evening. The owner, Mr. Castellano, kept rushing around, adjusting flowers, checking silverware, snapping at anyone who moved too slowly. Some big business group had booked the entire back section of the restaurant. Elena had served plenty of corporate dinners before, but this one seemed important. Really important. The men in suits started arriving around 7. Elena counted at least 12 of them, maybe more. They wore the kind of watches that could pay her rent for a year. Everything about them screamed money and power. But as she brought out the appetizers, she noticed something odd. They didn't look happy. In fact, they looked stressed. Really stressed. She caught bits of their conversation as she moved between tables. One older man with gray hair kept saying something about a merger. Another guy, younger, kept shaking his head and saying the numbers didn't work. There was also a group of Asian businessmen at one end of the table, speaking through a translator. The tension in that room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Elena had learned to be invisible during these dinners. Rich people didn't really see waitresses. They talked about their deals and their problems like the staff wasn't even there, so she heard more than they probably realized. The deal they were discussing wasn't just big. It was massive, billion with a B. And from what she could tell, it was falling apart right there over plates of ravioli and tiramisu. The American guy at the head of the table seemed to be in charge. His name was James Thornton, she'd heard someone call him. He had that look successful people get, confident but tired, like he'd fought 1,000 battles and won most of them. But this one was slipping away. Across from him sat a Japanese businessman, older, quieter. His translator whispered constantly in his ear, and Elena could see the frustration building on both sides. They were talking but not really communicating. Words were happening, but understanding wasn't. By 9:30, voices were getting louder. Not angry exactly, but definitely frustrated. Elena brought out more wine, trying to stay out of the way. She saw Thornton run his hands through his hair, saw the Japanese businessman's jaw tighten. Whatever they were trying to accomplish, it wasn't working. Then around 10, people started leaving. First in small groups, then everyone except a few stragglers. The mood was heavy, defeated. Elena had seen enough failed business dinners to recognize the signs. This deal, whatever it was, had just died. Thornton stayed behind, sitting alone at the table with a glass of whiskey. The Japanese businessman had stepped outside to make a phone call. A couple at a window table was finishing dessert. Otherwise, the restaurant was empty. Mr. Castellano had disappeared into his back office to count money, like he did every night. Elena started clearing tables, stacking plates carefully, trying not to make too much noise. Thornton was staring into space, looking like a man who'd just lost something important. As she reached for a plate near him, he muttered something under his breath. If only we could understand each other beyond the numbers. She froze for a second, wondering if he was talking to her. But no, he was talking to himself. She kept clearing, kept moving. It wasn't her place to respond. She had her own problems anyway. Rent was due in 3 days, and she was $400 short. Again. She'd probably have to ask her roommate for help. Again. The thought made her stomach hurt. But something about Thornton's words stuck with her. Understanding beyond numbers. Wasn't that what music did? When she used to play piano, really play. It didn't matter if someone spoke English or Japanese or Spanish. Music said things words couldn't. It reached past language, past culture, straight into the heart. She finished clearing his section and moved to the other tables. That's when she noticed it. The piano. Bellissimo had this gorgeous grand piano in the corner, a real Steinway. It had been there since the restaurant opened, mostly for decoration. They used to have a pianist play during dinner service, but he quit months ago and Mr. Castellano decided live music was too expensive. He'd locked the piano, called it unnecessary overhead, but tonight, in all the chaos with the VIP guests, Elena could see the piano lid was unlocked. Mr. Castellano must have forgotten in his rush. Elena had only played that piano once, about 6 months back during a private birthday party. The owner's daughter had requested live music and the regular pianist was sick, so they'd asked Elena. She'd said yes before she could think about it, and for 20 minutes she'd felt alive again, really alive. Her fingers on those keys, the sound filling the room, the feeling that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She'd dreamed about that piano for weeks afterward. Now it sat there, unlocked, almost like it was waiting for her. She glanced around. Thornton was still lost in thought. The couple by the window was paying their bill. Mr. Castellano was still in the back. The kitchen staff was cleaning up, the clatter of pots and pans covering any other sound. Elena stood there with a stack of dirty plates, exhausted and broke and wondering how much longer she could keep living like this. She looked at Thornton's defeated face. She looked at the piano. And something inside her just snapped, not in a bad way, more like a wall breaking down. She'd spent 3 years playing it safe, being responsible, doing what she had to do instead of what she wanted to do. And where had it gotten her? Still broke, still tired, still dreaming about the life she used to have. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was empathy for this stranger who'd lost his deal. Maybe it was just 3 years of held-back passion finally demanding to be let out. Whatever it was, Elena made a decision, probably a stupid decision that would get her fired. But for once, she didn't care. She put down the plates, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked toward the piano. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking, but her feet kept moving. She sat down on the bench, lifted the lid, and let her fingers touch the keys. And then, without letting herself think about consequences or rent or anything else, she started to play. The first note rang out clear and pure, cutting through the quiet restaurant like light through darkness. Elena's fingers found their home on the keys, and suddenly everything else disappeared. The dirty tables, the unpaid rent, the exhaustion, all of it just melted away. There was only the music. She started with Clair de Lune by Debussy. It was one of those pieces that everyone recognized, but few people really heard. Most people thought it was pretty, peaceful, but Elena knew what it really was. It was about finding light when everything feels dark, about beauty pushing through sadness, about hope when you've almost given up. Right now, in this moment, it felt like her story. Maybe it was Thornton's story, too. Her eyes closed as she played. She wasn't thinking about the notes anymore. They just flowed out of her, like water that had been dammed up for too long finally breaking free. Every missed opportunity, every dream she'd put aside, every night she'd cried herself to sleep, it all poured into the music. But so did every small victory. Every morning she'd gotten up and kept trying. Every moment she'd remembered why she loved this in the first place. The sound filled Bellissimo in a way that conversation never could. It wrapped around the tables, climbed the walls, filled every empty space. This was what the restaurant had been missing. Not just music. Sol Thornton's head snapped up like he'd been shocked. His glass of whiskey stopped halfway to his mouth. He turned in his chair and just stared at her. The couple by the window froze, forks in midair. Even the kitchen staff stopped what they were doing. Elena could feel their attention, but she didn't open her eyes. She just kept playing. As Clair de Lune faded, Elena transitioned into something else, something she'd written herself years ago back in college. It was a piece that had almost gotten her expelled, because her professor said it was too experimental, too weird. She'd taken a traditional Japanese folk melody called Sakura Sakura, the one about cherry blossoms, and woven it together with Western classical music. Her professor said you couldn't do that you had to respect the boundaries between musical traditions. But Elena had argued that music didn't have boundaries, not real ones. Music was about emotion, about connection, and emotions didn't have nationalities. A person in Tokyo felt sadness the same way a person in New York did. Joy was joy anywhere in the world. Her professor hadn't agreed, but Elena had kept the piece anyway. She'd never performed it publicly. Until now. The melody started soft and delicate like cherry blossoms falling. Then it grew, building with Western harmonies and rhythms, the two traditions dancing together instead of fighting. It shouldn't have worked. By all the rules she'd been taught, it should have been a mess. But it wasn't. It was beautiful. Outside the restaurant, Hiroshi Yamamoto, the Japanese businessman, was on his phone with his office back in Tokyo. He was telling them the deal was off, that they'd wasted 8 months trying to make something work that clearly never would. Then he heard it. The melody. Floating through the open door of the restaurant. He stopped mid-sentence. That tune, he knew that tune. His grandmother used to sing it to him when he was a little boy in Kyoto. She'd told him that music was the first language, the one that existed before people learned to speak. She said if you wanted to really understand someone, you didn't listen to their words. You listened to their music. Yamamoto ended his phone call without saying goodbye. He walked back toward the restaurant entrance like someone in a trance. The melody was familiar but also completely new. How was that possible? He stepped inside and there was a young woman at the piano, a waitress by the look of her uniform, playing this impossible piece that was both his grandmother's lullaby and something entirely different. Thornton watched Yamamoto come back in. He saw the expression on the older man's face. Something was happening here, something beyond business deals and contract terms. Thornton stood up slowly and walked toward the piano. Yamamoto did the same from the other direction. They ended up standing on opposite sides of the instrument, these two men who'd spent months trying to find common ground. Now silent, just listening. Elena played for about 10 minutes straight, maybe longer. Time felt weird. When the last note finally faded, the silence that followed was so complete you could hear the traffic outside, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, someone's breathing. Elena opened her eyes and immediately felt reality crash back down. Oh no, oh no, no, no. What had she just done? She was a waitress. Waitresses weren't supposed to abandon their jobs to play piano. Mr. Castellano was going to fire her for sure. She'd just lost the one steady income she had because she couldn't keep her emotions in check for once. She stood up so fast the bench scraped against the floor. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I'll get back to clearing the tables right now. Wait. Thornton's voice stopped her. He sounded different than before. Less tired. More alive. What you just played? Where did you learn that? Elena's mouth went dry. Both men were staring at her, waiting for an answer. I studied at the Manhattan Conservatory. Before I had to drop out, that piece was my senior composition project. I never got to finish the program, so I never got to present it officially. Yamamoto said something in Japanese, quick and urgent. His translator, who'd been standing outside, rushed back in. The translator listened, then turned to Elena. Mr. Yamamoto asks where you learned the Japanese melody. He wants to know if you studied in Japan. No, Elena said, her voice shaky. I studied world music in college. I wrote that piece because I believed that different musical traditions could blend together, that they weren't meant to be kept separate. My professor said I was wrong, that I was being disrespectful to both traditions. But I felt like music was supposed to bring people together, not keep them apart. The translator spoke to Yamamoto, and something changed in the older man's face. His eyes got a little watery. He spoke again, longer this time, his voice soft. The translator cleared his throat. Mr. Yamamoto says your music reminded him of something his grandmother taught him many years ago. She told him that understanding doesn't need translation. It needs feeling. He asks if you truly believe music can say what words cannot. Elena looked between these two powerful men, and suddenly, she understood why they'd been sitting at that table earlier, talking and talking but never really hearing each other. They'd been using the wrong language. Not English or Japanese, numbers, contract terms. Legal language. All words, no feeling, yes, she said quietly. I believe music shows us who we really are underneath everything else. When we listen to music together, we stop being on opposite sides. We're just people sharing the same moment, feeling the same things. Thornton and Yamamoto looked at each other. Really looked. Maybe for the first time all night. Something passed between them. Something unspoken but understood. Thornton spoke first, and his voice had this strange energy in it, like someone who'd just realized something important. We've been negotiating this merger for 8 months, he said. Every single meeting ends the same way. We get stuck on details, on cultural differences, on what we think the other person means versus what they actually mean. We both have translators, but we still can't understand each other. He paused, looking at the piano, then back at Elena. But just now, listening to your music, something clicked. I remembered why I wanted this partnership in the first place. It wasn't about the money or the market share. It was because Yamamoto-san and I had the same vision. We just expressed it differently. Your music reminded me that different doesn't mean wrong. It just means different. Yamamoto spoke through his translator again. In Japan, we have a word, ma. It means the space between notes, the silence that gives meaning to sound. In business, we forget about ma. We fill every moment with talking, with arguing, with defending our positions. Your music reminded me what we've been missing. Sometimes the space between words is more important than the words themselves. Before Elena could process what was happening, Mr. Castellano burst out of his office. His face was red, his eyes locked on Elena at the piano. Martinez, what do you think you're doing? Get back to work right now or you're... She just saved $1 billion deal, Thornton said, his voice cutting through Castellano's anger like a knife through butter. The owner's mouth snapped shut. He looked confused, then nervous, then very quiet. Thornton turned to Yamamoto. Are you willing to try one more time? Tomorrow morning. One last meeting. Yamamoto nodded slowly, never taking his eyes off Elena. Yes, but different this time. Just you and me. No lawyers. No negotiation teams. No translators. He gestured toward Elena. And her music. Elena's brain struggled to catch up. Me, I don't understand. I'm just a waitress who plays piano sometimes. No, Yamamoto said in careful English, speaking directly for the first time that night. His accent was thick, but the words were clear. You are artist. Artist sees truth others cannot see. He paused, searching for the right words. Tomorrow you play, we talk. Your music helps us remember why we started. Thornton reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. It was one of those heavy, expensive cards that probably cost more than Elena's entire stack of bills at home. He handed it to her, and she took it with trembling fingers. Can you come to Yamamoto Industries headquarters tomorrow morning? 9 o'clock. I'll pay you $5,000 for 2 hours of your time, just playing piano while we talk. If the deal goes through because of what you do, I'll add another $45,000 as a bonus. Elena stared at the card. The letters seemed to blur together. $5,000. $45,000 more if things worked out. That was $50,000 total. She did the math in her head, even though her brain felt like it was moving through mud. $50,000 would change everything. She could pay her rent for the entire year. She could clear her credit card debt. She could maybe, possibly, think about going back to school. Her hands were shaking so hard the business card rattled. She'd never held something worth so much money before. Well, not money exactly, but the promise of it. The possibility, but something felt wrong about it. Not bad wrong, just off somehow. These men were talking about $1 billion deal. Billion, with a B. And they were offering her $50,000 like it was pocket change to them. Maybe it was, but it wasn't to her. $50,000 was more money than she'd make in 2 years of waitressing and teaching music to kids who barely paid attention. Elena looked up at Thornton, then at Yamamoto, then back at the business card. A thought was forming in her mind. Something she couldn't quite put into words yet. Something about why she'd played that piano in the first place. She hadn't done it for money. She'd done it because she couldn't not do it. Because she saw a man sitting alone, defeated, and something inside her had responded. Because music was the only language she knew that could say what words couldn't. Because for 3 years she'd been pushing down who she really was. And tonight, for just a few minutes, she'd remembered. I'll do it, she said slowly. Both men smiled, looking relieved. But Elena wasn't finished. I'll take the $5,000 for my time. That's fair. That's work. But if the deal goes through, I don't want the bonus. Thornton's smile faded into confusion. What? Why not? Elena took a breath. This was crazy. She was about to turn down $45,000. Her roommate would kill her. Her bank account would kill her. The rational part of her brain was screaming that she'd lost her mind. But the part that had played that piano tonight, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be an artist instead of just a worker, that part knew this was right. If your deal succeeds, donate that money to the Manhattan Conservatory. Set up a scholarship fund for students who have to drop out because they can't afford to continue. Students like me, because I remember what it felt like when I had to leave. I remember standing in the financial aid office crying, while some woman who probably went home to a nice house told me there was nothing they could do. I remember feeling like I was giving up on myself, like I was failing. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. So if I help you tomorrow and if it works, use that money to make sure someone else doesn't have to feel that way. Use it to keep someone's dream alive. The restaurant was dead silent. Even Mr. Castellano, who'd been standing in the corner looking confused and worried, had gone completely still. Elena could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Thornton stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he extended his hand. You have a deal, Elena. And for what it's worth, the conservatory is lucky they had you even if they couldn't keep you. They shook hands. His grip was firm, warm, real. Yamamoto bowed to her, a deep bow that seemed to mean something important, though Elena wasn't sure exactly what. She bowed back awkwardly, hoping she wasn't doing it wrong. The two men left together, still not saying much to each other, but something between them had shifted. Elena could feel it. They walked out of Bellissimo side by side instead of with that careful distance they'd had before. Mr. Castellano approached her carefully like she might explode. Martinez, I don't know what just happened, but you're not fired. Clean up and go home. Get some rest. Apparently you have a big day tomorrow. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She finished clearing the tables in a daze, her mind spinning. What had she just agreed to? What if she messed it up? What if she played tomorrow and nothing happened and these two powerful men just sat there bored while their deal died anyway? What if she wasn't good enough? She took the subway home to her tiny apartment in Queens. Her roommate Lisa was already asleep. Elena sat on her bed in the dark, still wearing her work clothes that smelled like garlic and wine. She looked at Thornton's business card again. Tomorrow at 9. Yamamoto Industries headquarters. Bring music. She didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Instead, she pulled out her old sheet music from college, the stuff she'd shoved in a box under her bed and tried to forget about. She went through piece after piece, remembering which ones made people cry, which ones made them smile, which ones made them sit forward in their seats and really listen. She needed music that would build trust. Music that would help two people hear each other. Music that said what words couldn't say. By sunrise, she'd made her choices. Bach for clarity and structure. Sadi for simplicity and honesty. Some pieces by Ryuichi Sakamoto, a Japanese composer who'd bridged east and west his whole career. And her own composition, the one she'd played tonight. Because that had been the one that brought Yamamoto back into the restaurant. At 7 in the morning, she took a shower and put on her only professional outfit. A black skirt and white blouse she'd bought for job interviews 3 years ago. They still fit, barely. She looked at herself in the mirror and hardly recognized the person staring back. When had she gotten so tired? When had that light in her eyes gone out? But this morning something was different. There was a spark there, small but real. Hope, maybe. Or purpose. Or just the possibility that today might matter. The subway ride into Manhattan felt like it took forever. Elena clutched her folder of sheet music like a lifeline. Her stomach was doing flips. She'd skipped breakfast because she felt too nervous to eat. Probably a mistake. She popped a mint instead and tried to calm her breathing. Yamamoto Industries was in one of those glass towers that seemed to touch the sky. Elena had walked past buildings like this a million times, always wondering what it was like inside. Now she was about to find out. The lobby was all marble and steel, sleek and expensive. A security guard checked her name against a list, gave her a visitor badge, and directed her to the elevator. 47th floor. She watched the numbers climb, her reflection staring back at her in the polished elevator doors. She looked small, scared, out of place. But she was here. That counted for something. The elevator opened onto a hallway with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Elena had never seen the park from this high up. It looked like a painting, all green and perfect and far away. A woman in an expensive suit greeted her with a professional smile. "Ms. Martinez? They're waiting for you. This way, please." Elena followed her down the hall, her cheap shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. They stopped at a door and the woman opened it. "Good luck," she whispered, and there was something kind in her voice. Like she knew Elena was terrified and was trying to help. Elena stepped inside. The room was smaller than she'd expected. Not a massive conference room, but something more intimate. Windows on one side showing that impossible view of the park. A small round table in the middle where Thornton and Yamamoto sat across from each other. And in the corner, like it had been waiting for her, was a piano. Not just any piano. A Bösendorfer, one of the best in the world. The kind of instrument she'd only dreamed of playing. Its black surface gleamed in the morning light, and Elena felt her breath catch. Thornton stood up. "Elena, thank you for coming. We've agreed to try something different today. No lawyers, no contracts, no negotiation tactics. Just two people talking about what they want to build together. And you'll play while we talk. The music will keep us honest. It'll remind us why we're really here." Yamamoto nodded. Music is truth. Words can lie, music cannot. Elena walked to the piano on shaky legs. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. They felt cool and smooth under her fingers. Perfect. She looked back at the two men, both watching her expectantly. This was it. Time to find out if music really could do what she believed it could. Time to find out if she was right about art mattering in a world of business and money and deals. Elena took one deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The first piece Elena chose was Bach's Air on the G string. Steady, flowing like a river that knew exactly where it was going. She'd always thought of Bach as honest music. No tricks, no showing off, just pure structure and beauty. If these men were going to talk about building something together, they needed that kind of clarity. As her fingers moved across the keys, Thornton began to speak. His voice was different than it had been last night. Softer, more thoughtful. "I started my company 23 years ago in a garage," he said. "Everyone starts in a garage, right? That's the cliché, but it's true. I had this idea that artificial intelligence could help people, not replace them. That technology should make life better, not just faster or cheaper. Better." Elena kept playing, letting the music create a space for his words. She noticed how the melody seemed to give him permission to be honest, to drop the CEO voice and just be human. "Somewhere along the way I forgot that," Thornton continued. "The company got big. We started talking about market share and quarterly earnings and stock prices. All important stuff, but it wasn't why I started. I wanted to build something that mattered." Yamamoto listened, his hands folded on the table. Elena transitioned into something gentler, more introspective. She could feel the moment building like the air before a storm, but a good storm, the kind that clears everything. Thornton looked at Yamamoto. "That's why I wanted this merger. Because when I met you 2 years ago at that conference in Singapore, you talked about craftsmanship, about honoring the people who build things with their hands, about tradition meeting innovation, and I thought, that's it. That's what I've been missing." Yamamoto's translator started to speak, but Yamamoto held up a hand. He spoke in English, slow and careful, his accent thick but his meaning clear. "My grandfather made watches," he said, by hand, each piece he knew. Every spring, every gear. He could close his eyes and see how they moved together. When I started my company, I wanted to bring that spirit into modern world. To remember that behind every product is person. Person with skill, with pride. Elena shifted her playing slightly, adding a Japanese melodic quality to the Western structure. She'd studied how to do this in college, how to honor both traditions without making it sound forced. It was like cooking. You didn't just throw ingredients together. You had to understand how they complemented each other. Thornton leaned forward. "That's exactly what I want. Our AI technology combined with your manufacturing wisdom. But not just smashing them together. Really integrating them. Using technology to enhance craftsmanship, not eliminate it." "Yes," Yamamoto said, his face lighting up. "This is what I try to explain in all our meetings. But lawyers talk about intellectual property. Accountants talk about cost savings. Nobody talks about purpose." Elena watched them from the piano. Something was happening. The music was creating this bubble around them, this safe space where they could say what they really meant instead of what they thought they should say. She'd seen this before years ago. In music therapy sessions she'd observed. Music lowered defenses. It made people real. She played for another few minutes, then let the piece fade into silence. The two men sat there looking at each other like they were seeing clearly for the first time. "Can I ask you something?" Thornton said. "Last night, when you heard Elena playing, you came back inside. Why? What made you turn around?" Yamamoto was quiet for a moment, thinking. The melody reminded me of my grandmother. She raised me when my parents died. Every night she sang me Sakura Sakura. Cherry Blossom Song. She told me that cherry blossoms are beautiful because they don't last. They teach us to appreciate the moment, to see beauty even when we know it will end. His eyes got a little wet. She told me that business is same. Every deal, every partnership, it has a season. It blooms, it fades. What matters is not how long it lasts, but what it teaches us while it's here. Thornton nodded slowly. My dad told me something similar. Different words, but same idea. He said, don't build a business that lasts forever. Build a business that makes forever better. Elena started playing again, this time one of Eric Satie's gymnopedies, slow, contemplative, giving them space to think. The music wasn't leading them anymore. It was walking beside them, supporting them. So what do we actually want? Thornton asked. Not what do the lawyers want, or the shareholders, or the board. What do we want? Yamamoto thought about this. I want to create jobs that give people dignity. In Japan, we are losing craftspeople. Young people don't want to learn traditional skills. They think it's old-fashioned. But these skills, they matter. They connect us to our past. I want to show that tradition and technology can work together. I want that too, Thornton said. In America, we've automated so much that we've forgotten the human element. My AI can do incredible things, but it's empty without purpose, without heart. I want to build systems that make people's work more meaningful, not obsolete. Elena could feel the energy in the room shifting. They were talking faster now, ideas bouncing back and forth. She adjusted her playing to match, bringing in more energy, more momentum. What if we started with a pilot program? Thornton suggested. Take one of your manufacturing facilities and integrate our AI not to replace workers, but to assist them. Help them design better, work more efficiently, reduce mistakes, but they're still the ones creating. Yes, Yamamoto said, excitement growing in his voice, and we document process. Show other companies this is possible. That technology doesn't have to mean job losses. We could create a new model, Thornton continued. Other companies might follow. This could be bigger than just our merger. This could change how the whole industry thinks about automation. They talked for over an hour, ideas flowing freely. Elena played the whole time, switching between pieces, reading the energy in the room like a conductor reads an orchestra. When they got too focused on details, she'd play something that lifted them back to the bigger picture. When they started to drift into old patterns of negotiating, she'd play something that reminded them of why they were there. Around noon, Yamamoto sat back in his chair. You know what we haven't talked about? What? Thornton asked. Money. We haven't mentioned price or ownership percentage or any of the things our teams argued about for 8 months. Thornton laughed, and it was genuine from the belly. You're right. We haven't. Because none of that matters if we don't agree on what we're building. Exactly, Yamamoto said. The money will work itself out if the purpose is clear. If we both want same thing, we find way to make numbers work. Elena played a final chord and let it ring out. The sound hung in the air, then slowly faded. She lifted her hands from the keys and turned to face the two men. They both looked different than they had 3 hours ago, relaxed, energized, like they'd been carrying something heavy and had finally put it down. Thornton spoke first. I think we just outlined an agreement that our lawyers can spend the next month formalizing. But the real merger already happened. Right here, right now. Yamamoto stood and walked over to Elena. He bowed deeply, the kind of bow that meant serious respect. You gave us gift we did not know we needed. You showed us that business is not just transaction. It is relationship. It is harmony. Like music. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. I just played piano. No, Yamamoto said gently. You did much more. You reminded us how to listen. Not with ears. With heart. Thornton came over too. He pulled out his checkbook and wrote something, then handed her a check. $5,000, just like he'd promised. Then he paused and wrote something else on another check. I know you said no bonus, he said, but Yamamoto-san and I just decided something. We want to establish a scholarship fund at the Manhattan Conservatory, the Elena Martinez Fellowship, for students who show exceptional talent but face financial hardship. We're funding it with $500,000 to start. Elena's hands started shaking again. $500,000 for students like her, for kids who had dreams but empty bank accounts. And, Thornton continued, We want you to be the first recipient. If you choose to return and complete your degree, it's yours. Full tuition, living expenses, everything. The room seemed to tilt. Elena grabbed the piano for support. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to waitresses from Queens who played piano in restaurants after closing time. But the check in her hand was real. The two men smiling at her were real. This moment, impossible as it seemed, was actually happening. Elena stood there in that fancy conference room, holding two checks that represented more money than she'd ever seen in her life. Her vision got blurry with tears and she blinked hard, trying to keep it together. She'd cried enough over the past 3 years. These tears were different, though. These weren't the frustrated, exhausted tears she'd cried into her pillow at 3 a.m. These were the kind that came from hope, from possibility, from the universe suddenly making sense again. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Yamamoto smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Say yes. Say you will finish what you started. Say you will become the pianist you were meant to be." "Yes," Elena said, her voice stronger now. "Yes, I'll do it. And I promise you I'll make it count. Not just for me. For every student who comes after me." Thornton shook her hand again. "I believe you will. You've already changed 2 lives today, mine and Yamamoto-san's. Who knows how many more you'll change with your music." Elena left the building in a daze. The subway ride back to Queens felt surreal, like she was floating instead of sitting on hard plastic seats. She kept taking out the checks to make sure they were real, that the numbers hadn't changed. $5,000? And a scholarship that would let her go back to school. Actually go back. Finish what she'd started. Become who she was supposed to be. When she got home, Lisa was eating cereal in the kitchen. "Hey, how'd it go?" "You look weird." Elena just handed her the check for $5,000. Lisa's spoon clattered into her bowl. "What the hell?" "Elena, what did you do? Please tell me this is legal." Elena laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. "I played piano. That's it. I just played piano and everything changed." She told Lisa the whole story. About last night at the restaurant, about playing without permission, about the 2 businessmen and their failing deal, about this morning and the music and watching 2 people remember why they wanted to work together in the first place. Lisa listened with her mouth hanging open, cereal getting soggy in her bowl. "So you're telling me," Lisa said slowly, "that you're going back to the conservatory? Like for real?" "For real," Elena said, and saying it out loud made it hit differently. She was going back. She was going to finish her degree. She was going to be a pianist. The next few weeks were a blur. Elena gave her notice at the restaurant. Mr. Castellano was surprisingly nice about it, probably because Thornton and Yamamoto had become regular customers, always asking for her section when she was still working there. She quit her morning job teaching music to distracted kids. She applied for readmission to the Manhattan Conservatory. The admissions office was confused at first. Students didn't usually come back after 3 years, but when they saw the Elena Martinez fellowship paperwork, when they understood what had happened, everything changed. Her old professors reached out. The department chair called her personally. They wanted her back. 3 months after that night at Bellissimo, Elena walked through the conservatory doors as a student again. It felt like coming home after being lost for years. The practice rooms, the concert hall, the smell of old wood and rosin and possibility. She'd missed it so much it physically hurt. But it was different now, too. She was different. 3 years of waitressing had taught her things the conservatory never could. She knew what it felt like to be invisible, to work hard and have nobody notice. She knew what exhaustion felt like, real exhaustion, the kind that lives in your bones. She knew what it meant to keep going when keeping going seemed impossible. All of that went into her music now. When she played, it wasn't just technical skill anymore. It was life. Every note carried weight, carried meaning, carried the memory of every hard day she'd survived. Her professors noticed immediately. "Whatever happened to you out there," her piano teacher said after her first lesson back, "it made you a real artist. You're not just playing notes anymore, you're telling stories." Elena threw herself into her studies. She practiced 6, 7, 8 hours a day, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because every time she sat at a piano now, she remembered that night at Bellissimo. She remembered Thornton sitting alone with his failed deal. She remembered Yamamoto hearing his grandmother's lullaby in her music. She remembered understanding, finally understanding that music wasn't just pretty sounds. It was a bridge between souls. The scholarship fund that Thornton and Yamamoto had established grew. Other companies heard about what happened, about how music had saved a billion-dollar merger, and some of them thought it was a nice story to be associated with. They donated. Within a year, the Elena Martinez Fellowship had enough money to support 5 students. Then 10, then 20. Elena met every single one of them. She knew their stories because they were her story. The single mom trying to study music while raising 2 kids. The guy from the Bronx whose family thought music was a waste of time. The girl who'd been living in her car but refused to give up on her cello. Elena knew what it meant to have your dream barely out of reach, fingers stretching for something you couldn't quite grab. These scholarships they were grabbing back. 6 months after returning to school, Elena gave her graduate recital. The concert hall was packed. Her professors were there, of course. Other students, her mom looking healthier now, sitting in the front row crying before Elena even played a note. Lisa was there too, holding up her phone to record everything. But in the very front row, in the best seats in the house, sat Thornton and Yamamoto. They'd flown in specially for this. Their merger had gone through 3 months ago, and according to news articles Elena had read, it was already changing how the industry thought about automation and jobs. They'd kept their promise. Technology was enhancing craftsmanship, not replacing it. Elena walked onto the stage in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, no fancy jewelry or makeup. Just her and the piano. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and looked out at all those faces. A year ago, she'd been clearing tables and wondering if she'd ever touch a real piano again. Now here she was. She began with Claire de Lune, the piece she'd played that first night. But it sounded different now. Richer, deeper, like it had grown up alongside her. Then she played her composition, the one that had brought Yamamoto back into the restaurant. But she'd expanded it, developed it, turned it into something bigger. A full piece about bridges and understanding and how we're all speaking the same language if we just learn to listen. The audience was completely silent. That good kind of silent where you know everyone is holding their breath, afraid to break the spell. Elena played for 45 minutes straight, pouring everything into it. Every failure, every triumph, every moment of doubt, and every moment of hope. When she finished, the silence lasted just a beat longer. Then the applause started, and it was thunderous. People stood. Her mom was openly sobbing. Lisa was screaming. Thornton and Yamamoto were on their feet, clapping so hard their hands had to hurt. But the moment Elena would remember forever came after, during the reception. A young girl, maybe 16, approached her nervously. She was wearing clothes that had seen better days, holding a folder of music like it was precious. "Ms. Martinez?" the girl said quietly. "I'm applying to the conservatory next year. I'm hoping for the Elena Martinez Fellowship. I just wanted to say thank you. For not giving up, for showing people like me that it's possible." Elena felt that familiar sting of tears again. She hugged this stranger, this girl who reminded her so much of herself. "What's your name?" "Diana. Diana, let me tell you something. A year ago I was a waitress who thought my dream was dead. I was so tired I could barely stand. I'd convinced myself that music was something other people got to do, not me. And then one night I played a piano when I wasn't supposed to, and everything changed. Not because of magic, because I was brave enough to be myself even when it seemed pointless." She held Diana's shoulders and looked her in the eyes. "You're already brave. You're here. You're trying. That's the hardest part. Everything else is just showing up and doing the work. And yeah, it's hard work. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. But it's worth it. I promise you it's worth it." Diana nodded, tears running down her face. They talked for a while longer, about music and dreams and how to keep going when life gets heavy. Eventually Diana left, but Elena knew she'd see her again. Maybe in a classroom. Maybe at another concert. Maybe sitting in an audience someday while Diana played her own recital. That night, Elena, Thornton, and Yamamoto went to Bellissimo for dinner. Mr. Castellano had saved them the best table, the one near the piano. The piano that had started everything. It wasn't locked anymore. The restaurant had hired a new pianist, a talented kid who was working his way through school just like Elena had been. They ordered wine and pasta and talked about everything and nothing. About business and music and how sometimes the things that matter most can't be measured on a spreadsheet. About taking risks and being vulnerable and trusting that the universe might surprise you if you're brave enough to surprise yourself first. As they were finishing dessert, Yamamoto raised his glass to Elena, who reminded two stubborn old businessmen that the best deals aren't made with contracts, they're made with heart. Thornton raised his glass too, and to music, the language we all speak even when we don't know the words. Elena raised her own glass, looking at these two men who'd changed her life by letting her change theirs. To second chances, and to everyone who's brave enough to play their song, even when the world tells them to be quiet. They drank, and somewhere in the background, the new pianist played a soft melody that filled the restaurant with warmth. Elena closed her eyes and listened, and for the first time in 3 years she felt completely at peace. She'd found her way back to herself. And along the way, she'd learned that sometimes the biggest dreams come true in the smallest moments, when you stop trying so hard to make them happen and just let yourself be exactly who you are. The merger between Thornton Technologies and Yamamoto Industries became a case study in business schools. The Elena Martinez Fellowship helped hundreds of students over the years, and Elena herself went on to become not just a concert pianist, but a teacher, a mentor, and a reminder that your story isn't over until you say it's over. But none of that mattered as much as that one night in an Italian restaurant, when a tired waitress sat down at a piano and remembered who she was. Because that's when she learned the most important lesson of all. Music doesn't change the world. People do. Music just reminds us that we can.